Here at Moral Mondays, Iowa, I'm Connie Ryan. I'm the Executive Director of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, and we are one of the hosts of Moral Mondays, Iowa, and along with about 25 progressive organizations from across the state. And really it's about conversation about important issues at the State House. So very pleased to have Representative Scott Orth and Mike Delaney from the Isaac Walton League, and Mike has a lot of other hats that he wears as well, but we advertised it from the Isaac Walton League. And we're going to talk about water quality in Iowa today, and particularly Senate File 548. And so I'm going to turn it over to Mike. Thank you so much, both of you.
Well, thank you very much, Connie. I appreciate this opportunity to talk to this group. It's very interested in our natural capital, our natural resources, and the future of Iowa, and the kind of Iowa that we're going to leave to our kids and our grandkids and future generations. So thank you for assembling. Thank you for your work and your interests and your effort down here in this legislature. A lot of our decisions about the future of Iowa are made right here. Probably more of them are made in Washington, D.C. these days, but at both levels we have to be active. That's why I'm involved with the Isaac Walton League. We have a good organization with a 100-year history. Aldo Leopold, Ding Darling, we have some famous people that were part of the Isaac Walton League effort over the years. And we have a good lobby in Washington, D.C., so we work on the Farm Bill, etc., lots of things. But this isn't an advertisement for the Isaac Walton League. This is really to focus on what's happening in the legislature right now with regard to our natural resources, and water in particular. It was very well noticed quite a few weeks ago when a bill was introduced into subcommittee in the House of Representatives having to do with land acquisition and public lands. And it was amazing, the turnout from Pheasants Forever, Ducks Unlimited, Whitetail, Iowa Conservation Alliance, the Isaac Walton League, Sierra Club, on and on, Audubon, average citizens, and it was overwhelming, the turnout. And the concern was whether Iowa should have public lands or not. We have very little in the way of public lands in the state of Iowa, and there's constant tension between plowing and cultivating our land and preserving some for wildlife, recreation, and so on. Of course, the issue that is most central to us today is water quality. And that's specifically what we want to talk about, because the issue is whether the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, counties, cities, and others can use the state revolving loan fund, which is federal money, they have to pay it back, for the purpose of trying to preserve land that's fragile land that is wetland or could be wetland, along rivers, oxbows, and that sort of thing. And of course, we have a nutrient reduction strategy in the state, and millions of dollars are being expended to try to do something about our nutrient overloading of our waters, and of course the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. But the measurement of our waters still indicate that we're going in the wrong direction. We have more nutrients in our water than we have had in the recent past for a long time. And rather than reaching or heading toward a target of 45% reduction in nutrients in our waters, we're going the other way. So here's the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation and cities and counties trying to do something about water quality with loan money that they have to pay back, and we have opposition to that practice. For those of us in the conservation community, for the Isaac Walton League members, it's like, what? What are we doing? I would like to read something from an Isaac Walton League member who is much more articulate and much more informed than I am, and he's well known, and I think it may be of interest to you and the general public, since we have cameras and microphones up here. This is from Jim Pease. Jim Pease is a retired professor from Iowa State University, recently paddled most of the major rivers in the state of Iowa and has done reports on wildlife and the conditions of our water. He is very articulate. He does radio programs, very well known, very well liked. And I didn't get permission from Jim to read this, but he has sent it out to most of the members of the House, House of Representatives, so it's definitely public. As a member of the Story County Conservation Board and president of Friends of Ada Hayden Heritage Park, a city of Ames Park, I ask you to oppose Senate File 548 when it comes before your committee. This bill would severely limit the ability of counties to acquire land that is critical in helping to solve Iowa's water quality problems. We need the partnership of both private landowners who come to us wanting to have their land owned and managed by the county in the future, and private nonprofits who can act more quickly than governments can when land is being offered. This bill will halt the ability of nonprofits to use the state revolving fund for assisting us in such land purchases. Here are several points. There are several important facts you should know. Everybody should know. One, Iowa is next to last in the nation in the percent of our land in public ownership, including land owned by city, county, state, or federal governments. Only Rhode Island has a lower percentage of land in public ownership. Our position is not a position of honor, and the attempt of some groups to oppose public lands in Iowa is dumbfounding. Point two, public lands are critical to maintain and increase our quality of life. In order to grow and diversify our economy, to attract a variety of young professionals, to hold young people who graduate from our excellent colleges and universities, we must have a landscape that is diverse, one that has recreational amenities and clean water. Three, the state revolving fund offers low and no-cost loans to towns, cities, counties, and nonprofit groups to help improve our water quality. It is funded largely by federal funds from the EPA. Iowa taxpayers contribute only 1/6 of the dollars in this fund, and the loans are paid back. It continues to fund dozens of projects to install and improve sanitation systems across the state. Only one part of the SRF is available to nonprofits for source water protection. And he gives a website for more information. Number four, the acquisition of lands along rivers, streams, and lakes are critical to water quality efforts. I want to interject here that Jim Pease spoke before the Isaac Walton League. We had 95 people in the room, and he said, it is along our river corridors that we still have natural Iowa resources, including trees, plants, and wildlife. And paddling those corridors, as I do, you can see that there is a lot to save in the state of Iowa in terms of our wildlife. He goes on, nearly all of the land we acquire is very marginal land that is acquired by Iowa Natural Heritage for this purpose. Land that should not have been farmed, especially for row crops in the first place. To best protect these riparian zones, they should be managed as natural resource lands by both public and private landowners. When private landowners are not able to or no longer wish to do so, they should not be impeded by the legislature in offering their land to public entities. Rather, they should be encouraged. The SRF, as it is now, allows that to happen. I think I've got a couple minutes. Two personal things. One, my son, Connor Delaney, owned land along Yater Creek in the city of Des Moines that feeds Easter Lake. The county is spending millions to improve Easter Lake. Yater Creek is a mess. It is mainly because it takes the runoff from the airport and a lot of other paved land in the city of Des Moines. Connor worked with the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation so that they could purchase that land to later turn it over to the city or county to stabilize banks, do something in that stretch of river to improve Easter Lake. That is not corn ground. It floods every year. It's full of trees and a lot of debris. It is not the kind of thing that makes the case that the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation is competing with farmers for good corn ground. Second point, I own land along the Raccoon River. I bought a small farm. It was in corn. The corn was planted to the edge of the river. I put in, I have a riparian zone in there. It was grasses. It's now turned into native trees along that floodplain. The river flooded mightily along there, and I do not have water running off of my fields directly into the Raccoon River as it had when I bought the land. There were 8 to 10 foot gullies, valleys of running topsoil off of that land. It's a sloped land right into the Raccoon River. I stopped that with prairie, and I put a lot of time, tremendous amount of time and effort and money into restoring that. Now I have woodcocks doing the sky dance over my fields, and I am thrilled. If you've read Aldo Leopold's Sand County Almanac, you know what I'm talking about. I could go on about that, but I won't. I'll say this. If my family is not going to keep that land the way I have prepared it, I do not want corn or beans on that ground. It should not be planted. I could give that land, donate that land to the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, and I would go to my grave knowing that it will be protected forever and the woodcocks will be there forever, because these guys have been around for over a million years, many millions of years, and they like it there. So that's all I have to say. This is Representative Scott Orth, recipient of awards from organizations I've been involved with for his conservation efforts over the year. Most importantly, in my opinion, the protection of Iowa's natural turtle population. So thank you, Representative Orth, for your past work.
Thank you,
Mike
sir.
is here.
Well, it was an honor that Mike, I know, he refuses to admit this, but no one gets to be the Raccoon River Watershed Legislator of the Year unless somebody named Delaney's got something to do with that. So thank you very much for that. And I was also named and I'm very honored to have been Legislator of the Year by the State Isaac Walton League for my work on conservation efforts as well. But you know, for me, this is a no-brainer. I grew up on the Mississippi River on a farm run by my grandfather. They raised apples and grapes, and even back in those days in the 40s when my grandfather was farming, he made sure that there were buffer strips, nice wide buffer strips between his crop ground and the river itself. And so I kind of learned from a bunch of really kind of just natural environmentalists. They just understood that it was a lot more than a farm, which provided an income for our family, but they were very cognizant of their responsibility, that this land was only theirs for a while. They were, you know, over the arc of their time, and during that time, they felt very strongly, it was almost a spiritual thing for them, that they were to be good stewards over the land because it wasn't theirs. They were only on it for a bit, and then it would move from generation to generation, and it needed to be handled properly and cared for properly. So, when this bill, and Mike's talking about, there were 4 species of turtles that were, none of the states contiguous to Iowa allow the harvest of turtles. And there were, you know, there was the spiny softshell, the smooth softshell, the painted turtle, and the American snapping turtle. There are huge markets for those in China. They think that they're medicinal. Their ground shells have some sort of mysterious medicinal value, and the turtle meat is very popular. So when all the other states around Iowa decided they weren't going to allow turtle harvesting anymore because the numbers were being decimated and they were going to be moved to the point of extinction. That sounds a bit dramatic, but it's true. And so I was part of a bipartisan team of people who saw this coming. What do you think happened when all the other states, these guys are selling turtles on the China market, what do you think happened when all the other states said you can't do it? Well, they all came to Iowa, didn't they? So now we have this huge multiplier effect. And, you know, turtles can't talk, so somebody had to do the talking for them. So 4 or 5 of us decided to take that one on, and we were able to put a moratorium on the harvest of turtles in the state of Iowa, and which is a good thing. I mean, out of a clutch of 100 eggs, only 1 survives. And the female, it takes her 7 years typically to reach the age of maturity, you know, childbearing maturity. And so they're not like rabbits or mice, you know, they don't reproduce, you know, constantly and you know, in great numbers. And so it would only take 2 or 3 years and our turtle populations would have been gone. So we got that done. I have a little turtle. after that vote took place the next morning, I came to work and there were Ninja Turtles and like all kinds of little stuffed turtles and everything on my desk. It was kind of funny, really. But I'm glad. I mean, you know, I'm glad it happened that way. When this bill, so being the person feeling the way I do about our natural environment, I think, and I might have the numbers wrong, I think only 4% of the land mass in the state of Iowa is set aside for public use, and only about half of that for state use. The other half is city parks, county conservation, county conservation board land and things like that. So this thing's coming down the pike under the guise of protecting, arable farmland and, agriculturally, valuable or producing farmland. So I got to peeking around and looking into this thing and drilling down a little deeper into this bill. And I asked the sponsors, it was the Farm Bureau, I asked the guys, I said, okay, so under this bill, let's say that we had an 80-acre pond that was adjacent to my county conservation ground, public ground that owned and operated by the county. And there was an 80-acre pond privately owned by a farmer, and the farmer wanted to donate that pond to the county for the purposes, of course, of letting people paddle on the water and fish the waters and enjoy that resource. Would they be able to acquire that ground under the current bill? And the answer was no. You can't till a pond and you can't graze it. It has no ag value at all. But under the rule, my county conservation board could not acquire that 80-acre pond. So that raised some antenna on me, and I started going a little further with this thing. Well, this first incarnation of this bill reached clear to cities. So the city of Indianola, let's say that my friend Jared Downey, whose land butts up next to a park, city park in my city, let's say he wanted to donate that ground, and or let's say he put it up for auction, and the city wanted to use the state revolving fund, the Natural Heritage Foundation, to purchase that ground. The city would not be able to do that under that first rendition of that bill. So it went to counties and cities and all kinds of crazy things like that, and it was just an incredible overreach. Well, fortunately, I named myself to that subcommittee. I'm the ranking member on natural resources, where the bill was, and the chairperson and the vice chair also named themselves. So it was the three top leadership people, and it was bipartisan. And we studied the bill out and studied it out, and then we decided, okay, we all think we know how we're going to go on this, but we held the subcommittee. Now, I got to tell you, and it's a credit to all of you and many more, of your colleagues and our friends. We have bills on firearms stuff, some of which are fairly extreme. We have bills that want to curtail a woman's right to make her own health care decisions. We have stuff that's very polarizing and extremely hypercharged. You know what I mean? And so I've seen the collective bargaining bill, the Chapter 20 bill. I've seen the Capitol load up with people before on issues that are extraordinarily polarizing. Never in a million years have I seen this place jam-packed like it was when we had that subcommittee. It was amazing to me, and it gave me great heart that the citizens of Iowa don't just sit around watching the 6 o'clock news and lament what they see, but that you were in here, doing what we do in America, making our voices heard and sounding off about something that really was alarming to you. And I'm telling you, you guys carried the day by doing that. I need to affirm that. It wasn't just, window dressing. It wasn't just a bunch of showboating. It was the people of the state of Iowa expressing their extraordinary angst over something that we viewed as an overreach, unnecessary, and wrong on its face.
Every walk of life.
Right, exactly. So we blocked that bill, and it was bipartisan. We killed it. We decided not to sign it. We decided it was wrong, and we killed it. What do you think happened about 3 days later? Well, it got reassigned to committees that the other guys weren't on. I am on the Agriculture Committee, and so, here we go again, right? So the Senate file came over. The Senate file was pared down, and a lot of stuff was stripped out of it that made it bad. Namely, and credit to Senator Rosenboom, who is the chair of the of the the Natural Resources Committee over in the Senate. There was a piece in there that put a moratorium on $12 million worth of land acquisitions that were already in the pipeline. They were already approved. They were taking place. They were using the Natural Heritage Foundation and the State Revolving Fund to complete the purchases and get everything set up. And they put a moratorium on it, saying that those projects were dead in the water. Because they used the State Revolving Fund, they couldn't move forward. And that was mortifying. It was absolutely horrifying. And much to Senator Rosenboom's, and I disagree with him on a lot of stuff, but I got to hand it to him on this one. He pulled that moratorium back and allowed that $12 million worth of projects to move forward. However, he didn't take off the restriction moving beyond those projects to use the State Revolving Fund for land acquisition purposes for water quality things, grass, waterways, buffer strips, terracing, whatever you want, So now the bill is in the Agriculture Committee in its watered down form, but it's still bad. It's not good, because at the heart of it all, regardless of what they've taken out of it, it still restricts private entities, that would be cities, counties, the state DNR, from accessing the Natural Resource Foundation and the State Revolving Fund to make those purchases. Now, my county conservation board doesn't have the cash flow to purchase, 40s or 80 acre sections of ground or whatever. And so they routinely use the Natural Heritage Foundation to do those purchases. The argument on the private side is that why do they get to a zero interest or low interest loan and we have to go to the banks and pay 6% or whatever? Well, that's just the marketplace. That's just how it works. And, the argument that that the DNR outbids people on the purchase of ground that's up for auction is a fallacy. Don't let anyone tell you that. Don't ever believe that, because under the rules of engagement, when a private entity such as the DNR, the County Conservation Board, the City Park Board, or whoever wants to access that State Revolving Fund, on any bid, we're only allowed to, okay, so there's an appraised value, okay? It's the land is appraised by a third party, non-interested person or appraisal firm. And whatever that land is appraised at, the state or the county or whoever can only bid $1 above appraised value. And then we have to stop. So if the private person bids $2 above that, they win, right? That's how it works. So, and the other thing is, most of the ground that we try to, preserve and protect for public use is great big giant ravines, stuff that's not tillable land in the first place. The vast majority of the land that we use, that we want to preserve, is in floodplain areas, right down there. So anybody ever drive between Indianola and Knoxville on Highway 92?
Yeah.
Okay, you ever see that place? It's just constantly flooded. Somebody puts corn on that thing every year and it gets drowned out. I don't know why they even bother to do it. I mean, I don't know how, but the kind of land we're talking about is floodplain ground, rough ground, what they call rough ground. You can't till it, it doesn't serve as good pasture ground or anything like that. So on its face, to me, this is just a way to, it's a way for an entity that doesn't like the DNR, that doesn't like state government, that doesn't like regulations and rules and all that kind of stuff, to run roughshod over the rest of us and prevent us from doing what we all know needs to be done. And they do that in the name of preserving and protecting agriculturally valuable farm ground, and that argument doesn't hold water. So it's in the Ag Committee. It passed the Agriculture Committee along a party line vote last week. Senate File 548 did. The plea from the Farm Bureau and others to the Republican chair, Ross Poston, and the others was just, it's funnel week, just pass it out of committee so it can stay alive. And that's what happened. I will tell you that the president of the Farm Bureau Federation, Craig Hill, is my constituent and lives just about a half a mile away or so. His son, Adam, is the president of the Farm Bureau Federation in Warren County, and I've had a good relationship with him. We've worked on things together that made sense for the ag community, that did not put anybody else in harm's way or anything like that. So naturally, my constituents are running that outfit, one can only stop for a moment and ponder how, what lies ahead politically down the road. But I didn't have to think too long about that, and I voted no. I voted no on it, and I'll tell you what you guys did for me, and I will never, ever be able to thank you enough. I called my friends at the Farm Bureau before I took that vote, and I talked to the lobbyists out in the hallway, and I called the Farm Bureau people here in Des Moines and back home in my district, and I told them that we've worked together on things in the past and we'll work together on things in the future, but we're not going to see eye to eye on this one. And at the end of the day, and I said, I want you to hear what I'm going to tell you. At the end of the day, I owe a debt of service to the people of my district, and their voices have been overwhelming in their opposition to this. And last time I checked, my title was state representative, and I have to represent. And I make no apologies for that. I wish we could find a way to come together, but it looks as though you've come as far as you're going to come on this thing. We were going to offer amendments, they weren't going to take them. And that was the end of that, right? So the bill passed with a 3-vote margin along party lines last week out of committee. So what remains now is to see whether they have the votes in their caucus to bring it forward. I can tell you in the political business, leadership won't bring a bill to the floor only to have it fail. That's a huge humiliation for them and an embarrassment for them to do so. I haven't seen that bill on the blue calendar. Well, I'll look today, they'll bring one out at 1 o'clock. But my guess is they haven't drummed up the necessary votes to ensure passage of this bill on the floor. I will continue to work on behalf of you and everyone else who feels this is an overreach, that it's unnecessary, that it's wrong, that it's just wrong. This doesn't need to happen. The preservation and protection of public land and buying land from private entities to put it into the public trust for the purposes of keeping our waterways, helping make our waterways regain their health, is morally the right thing to do. It's the morally correct thing to do, and anything other than that is morally bankrupt. And I'll have nothing to do with that. And I've told those people that. I wasn't elected to play funny games and to do the smoke and mirrors thing. If it's morally wrong, count me out. So that's where I am on this thing, and I'll continue to fight against the passage of this bill. And with everything I have, when you're in the minority and the other team has the House, the Senate, and the governor's mansion, then one has to become quite creative when one wants to block something. But all I really have is the power of persuasion. But I think I can make a moral case for what's right and for what's wrong. And I will continue to do that with my Republican colleagues moving forward. I don't have to worry about my Democratic colleagues, Art and the guys back there, Breckenridge and Dave Williams and Monica Kurth here. I know where their hearts are on this thing, and it does me a world of good to know that I have such able people, on my side. So with that, I want to thank you again, because you've made an enormous difference in this conversation. Don't stop, okay? Don't stop yet, because the story has not, the last chapter has yet to be written, and I'd like for you guys to be the ones that write it, okay? So we'll open it up for questions now.
Yep. So if you just raise your hand and have questions. Mike, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Mike Kurth from Massey. I've actually got 2 questions. Number one, the Des Moines Register this morning had a large article talking about legislation that has been written by outside entities, for example, ALEC. Is there any suspicion that all or parts of this bill were written by an outside entity like ALEC? Number 2, with the recent flooding that's been going on and the number of CAFOs that are in our state, are there any repercussions for those operators of those CAFOs when their lagoons are overrun by floodwater and they pollute the water?
I'll answer the first one, you answer the
questions.
second.
Number 1, is it written by outside entities? Number 2, repercussions for compromised CAFO lagoons?
I'll answer the ALEC question, and we'll let Mike talk about the lagoon issue. I have no evidence right now. Here's the thing. For those of you who don't know, and I'm sure all of you do, I mean, you're very well-informed people, the Koch brothers and their cohorts have a political arm and a policy arm that is well-financed by them nationally. The political arm is Americans for Prosperity. And Americans for Prosperity is a PAC, a clearinghouse for huge and dark money. And what they do, typically, they set a national agenda, and they set about the business of electing people who buy into their extreme political philosophies for the purpose basically of amassing great wealth in the hands of the few at the expense of the many. At whatever cost to the many, they don't care. They simply do not care. They are elitists. They are, it reminds me of the French Revolution, really. Let them eat cake, right? So the political arm has this benign name, the American Legislative Exchange Council. That doesn't scare anybody, right? Until you open the cover of the book and look and see the demons and devils that live inside that thing. So what they do is they write boilerplate legislation. And you go to other states, Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, all around, and I've done this personally. I've done this research as a legislator. I feel I have a kind of a personal mantra that to whatever degree I'm undereducated on anything upon which I have to vote is the same degree to which I've just underserved the people who elected me to know what I'm doing when I push that button. So I did this research, and my clerk, Alex, back here, gets a big high five because she works herself very long hours helping me research things and does a fantastic job of it. So you look at it and you'll see that Kansas and Nebraska and all the others have very similar legislation when it comes to reproductive rights, firearms legislation, and et cetera. It's hostile to the common human being. Their legislation is very hostile. I have no evidence that ALEC is responsible for this particular piece. The Farm Bureau Federation in Iowa has a policy book that does not adhere 100% or is not directly related to the policy books in other agricultural states, like Kansas, for instance. They developed their own piece here, and it's largely driven locally by local legislative leaders who have a bone to pick with natural resources, and we've got those, who don't like the DNR. And so they come up with ways to use their legislative power to chip away at the DNR's authority. And this goes to, trying to make them have, if someone poaches a deer and someone sees that done and they call the DNR and say, I just saw somebody shoot a deer illegally, they tried to make it where the DNR would have to go to a judge to get a search warrant to go on that ground to investigate that, and by the time that's done, the nefarious actors have cleaned up behind them, and you can't prove anything. So they just want to take the DNR's power away. So the answer to your question is, I think the concentration of resources and ideas on this one is local to Des Moines, to Iowa, yeah. Because I looked and I couldn't find anything that was similar in other states. This was just it was a power grab, a land grab thing, in my view. Now, Michael, go ahead with the CAFO
Mike,
flooding
what
thing.
is your last name?
McCarthy.
McCarthy. Mr. McCarthy, that's a very good question. And I don't know the law in Iowa with regard to punishment for that. I would say this. In North Carolina, there was a massive flood, the Neuse River. Those animal confinement cesspools, waste lagoons were flooded. Pigs floated down the Neuse River. All that manure went down the river and went off into the ocean. And the people were just horrified at the mess that was created by all of that. The result was a moratorium on new animal confinements in that state. Guess where they went? Iowa.
Yeah.
So here comes Smithfield. Now they're owned by the Chinese. And I don't think we have a lot of leverage over the Chinese with regard to that whole deal. But we are putting hog confinements where they should not be. We are putting manure lagoons on karst topography, where that stuff goes right down through the limestone into water supplies and right into the upper Iowa River. And they certainly shouldn't be in floodplains. I mean, really, come on. We just don't have the regulation that we need in order to keep that industry, within bounds so that we have a future. I mean, the consequences for the state of Iowa, and how many people are we losing because of that? Who's going to build a nice, expensive home downwind from animal confinement? Those people that made those investments, they came back to Iowa, they got grandpa's farm, put a nice house in, the confinement goes in next door, they can't live there. Property values crash. So I would focus on the rules with regard to placement of animal. And then we've got this rule that says that any family member can put in put a confinement next to the, so that you have overpopulation of pigs in a given area because of circumventing the rules as far as animal head count limits, right? And then the application of manure, we know hog manure is being over-applied. This is a very touchy issue. I got libeled by the Farm Bureau on this one when I testified to this. We are over-applying hog manure, which means we have way too much phosphorus on some of our farm ground. Farmers know it. They just can't afford to haul it, far enough away from their confinements. So it comes down through the tiles into the rivers, and we have a very high phosphorus load. And it's phosphorus that determines the algae pollution and cyanobacteria, which is toxic. That's from phosphorus. We focus a lot on nitrogen. We don't talk nearly enough about phosphorus because the pork industry is pretty good at protecting their interests. That's my view on that one.
So elections matter.
Absolutely. And I guess I can't talk too much about that, but I'm engaged.
Rick, question?
Yeah, so my question is related to his, actually. That's about flooding. We're just suffering one of the largest floods in history on the Missouri River. And we know part of the reason for that is because we've done away with green spaces, places for that water to go during floods.
Yeah.
June 30th, we had a monstrous flood here in Polk County. 6,100 homes suffered water damage. One of the things they keep telling us is that Iowa's going to get wetter, significantly wetter, and that one of the solutions is to have more green space, more open areas upriver. Doesn't this go counter to that?
Absolutely. I attended 3 major ag conferences this spring. One was the Farmers Union up at Perry. 2 of them were at Iowa State University. I'm very pleased. John Lawrence helped to organize a conference on soil health. And they're all talking about carbon. They're all talking about life in the soil. They're all talking about porosity and water infiltration and all of that. All of that contributes to holding water, which corn needs, which produces more yield. But yet, we are into a pattern of taking carbon out, compacting soil, losing topsoil, and applying more and more chemicals with the hope that we can get enough corn to keep the bank from withholding loans to our farmers. I do not blame farmers. A lot of my friends say, yeah, farmers can do more. Of course they can do more. But they are really trapped. Read Art Cullen's book on Storm Lake. He spoke to the Raccoon River Watershed Association at Perry last Saturday. We had 38 people in the room, and he sold $1,100 worth of his books. His book is great. I've read it, and he understands Iowans, Iowa agriculture, and the big economic picture that has got our farmers so badly squeezed. What they're told is produce more corn. Yeah, what happens to the price? Yeah. To grab all this land that we're talking about here, produce more corn. Who does that benefit? People who sell seed, people who sell chemicals, people who are feeding pigs, people who are selling grain abroad. But our farmers are not, they're break even. Again, how many years kind of break even? The banks are saying, we got problems here, guys. Men and women.
What was the name of the book again?
Oh, In a Storm Lake.
Storm Lake.
by Art Cullen, and he is brilliant.
I want to address for all of you what we as legislators and our, you know, our options are limited as to what we can, what we can really get done, because the process, we're the legislative branch, you know, that we've got, 3 branches of government, and that's how that works. So I've had to, the idea is, knowing full well that we're never going to, this is not going to be a successful long bomb from the 1-yard line into the other end zone. This is going to, we're going to have to pick up a yard or two, and it's going to be down by down by down. If we're ever going to get where we want to go, it's going to be tough, and we're going to have to run the ball the best we can down the field. For me, my piece, and my legislative colleagues have their own little areas of focus and whatnot. For me, on the Agriculture Committee and the ranking member of the Natural Resources Committee, I'm dedicated to trying to find more funding, real funding for county soil and water conservation boards, so that they can have more technicians and experts in the ways of water quality works, things like terracing for farmers. Most of the farmers in my district have no real aversion to putting up bioreactors, grass waterways, buffer strips, and doing so in ways that are really productive, especially cover crops and things like that. But they run small businesses, and with commodity prices the way they are right now, a lot of them are barely breaking even, if they are even doing that. And these are good faith people. They're good human beings. They're not bad actors. They're our neighbors and our friends, trying to make a living in a way that their family has made a living for generations on end. And there's no sin in that. They want to do good things, but they can't afford it, quite frankly. So my job is to try to find ways to provide cost share programs for them that really get them over the tipping point, where it's real, where the cost share stuff is real and they can pencil it out and bottom line that. And by doing so, then we activate the engineers and the technicians and et cetera on a county level along the Middle River and the North River in my district, the Des Moines River in the northeast portion of my district, and the South River. My district has more running water per capita than any other district in the state. And so I find it to be a personal stewardship, a necessary stewardship of mine, to figure out ways to help our farmers do what they really want to do. And so I'm working on cost share programs for cover crops, grass waterways, buffer strips, other forms of land modification in the riparian areas, so that we get these things underway. And farmers, they understand soil loss, and it scares them to death. They understand soil erosion. They understand the degradation of Mother Earth, not only from an agricultural production bottom line perspective, but from a stewardship of Mother Earth perspective, which most of these people are. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find more resources for the local folks to do what they need to do. And if we can put together a patchwork of this farm adjacent to this farm along this river, and we get all that farm ground on both sides of that river cost shared out for cover crops and grass waterways and buffer strips, bingo, So that's what we're working on right now. Just trying to move the ball down the field a little bit.
Any other last questions? All right, well, thank you, Representative Warren.
Sure, thank you guys. Thank you guys very much. Thanks, buddy.